Herb Kagan is my full name, and I'm the outreach coordinator for Thelma McMillan in Torrance, connected to Torrance Memorial Hospital. Many of you have been down there for some of our professional development programs. A couple of them are on the table in terms of flyers, so I won't even talk about them. If you're interested, just take the flyer. I'm so really happy to be here. And I do have a PowerPoint presentation, and I promised that I would be done certainly no later than 1:30, maybe within an hour, and I heard that you have something else to do if you're going to do the tour at 1:45, so that really works out. I've also been warned by a couple very courteous people that they might have to leave early, and leave early if you need to, want to, or you just get bored or tired with it all. And but I will remember. I'm going to talk today about 12-step spirituality. All right, and a lot of people take a double take. Even people in 12-step program, some of you may or may not be, I'm not asking, but they've never connected the 12-step culture with spirituality. And quite frankly, I was one of those people. My sobriety date is February 21st, 1984. I just celebrated 30 years, which is wonderful. But for the first 5 years, I did not know it was a spiritual program. I mean, I thought it was a program to deal with my alcohol problem and to come and establish a little fellowship. I did get a sponsor and all of what we do in terms of the moving parts. And but then I thought out sufficiently to hear a man say, there are two sides to 12 steps program. There are two sides, the spiritual side and the outside. It's all spiritual. You see, the Buddhists have a wonderful way of talking about the difference between religion and spirituality. The master stands there pointing the way to a relationship with the mystery, but many of the disciples become enthralled with the finger pointing. The difference between organized religion, one of the differences, and spirituality is that organized religion's purpose is to find spirituality, a relationship with the mystery. The purpose of the 12 steps is not to deal with alcohol. All right. Bill says that in several places in the big book. Alcohol's not the problem. The problem is a spiritual malady. The problem is a lack of a relationship with, he calls it God, G-O-D, which is the symbol for that which we cannot name. All right. He also gives us an alternative with higher power. But the whole book and the whole program has a silver bullet. That is, we have no dogma. And it was given to him by the man who introduced him to spirituality, Ebby Thatcher, when Ebby said, and Bill opened the door, and Bill said, "Oh my God, you're sober. How did that happen?" And Ebby said, "I got religion." And Bill said, "Certainly, you're smarter than that." And Ebby said, "Relax. Relax. Choose your own concept. Choose your own concept." And so we're going to talk about the 12-step methodology to deal with addiction, certainly the first half of the first step. So then that started me on a journey to find power. And I was confronted with my agnosticism. Step 2, came to believe. Oh, that phrase itself tells you everything. But I couldn't read it and understand it. I had to be in AA rooms and do the steps over many periods of time for 10 years before I understood came to believe. A process. For 10 years, I thought I believed. Until they asked me this question, you might want to ask yourself, what do you actually believe about God? What do you actually believe about higher power or spirit? or higher self? What is it that you actually believe about this fourth dimensional reality? And I suggest you do that in writing. 1 sentence, 2 sentences, a paragraph, a page if you're more than a writer, all right? And then, after a period of time, ask yourself the second question. This man asked me the first question, and then a week later gave me the second question after I had answered the first question from my theological background. He said, so, in light of what you believe, how do you behave? Oh my God. That is a confrontational question. And what I learned was that my head is delusional. It won't necessarily tell me the truth, but my feet will always tell me the truth. How I behave is who I am. How I behave is who I believe. If I cheat on my expense account, I'm a thief. But my head says, no, I'm entitled because they don't pay me enough. Or it'll be okay because I'm working really hard. No, Herb, your behavior tells you who you are, not your head. You're a thief. Well, as long as I don't get caught in infidelity, it's not a problem at 5 years of sobriety. All right? So I can be really an excellent AA guy and sponsor people and talk the talk because I got some gifts in that area. And then I look at my feet and I go, no, you're a cheat. That's called infidelity. That's a lack of personal integrity. It's anything but operating on spiritual principles. And I was confronted with my agnosticism. Meaning, not intellectually, but practically. I doubted the relevance of God or higher power or spirit of the universe or universal spiritual principles. I doubted the relevance of it because I behaved as if they didn't exist, and I wasn't responsible for them or to them. So it brought me to a whole new level of, once again, humility and embarrassment. As I then opened myself up, he suggested I pray a prayer to set aside my old ideas, because I had a lot of information and I had a lot of experience. He said, to the extent that you hold on to that information and that experience, you're condemned to have no new information or no new experience. And Einstein said that, didn't he? The consciousness that created the problem cannot be the consciousness that solves the problem. That's brilliant. The consciousness, my mind, cannot solve the problems of my mind because my mind is the problem. I need to have healing in my mind. I need a new consciousness. And the simplest prayer is, Holy Spirit of the universe, release me from up till now, detach me from after now, and allow me to be fully present in the now. If you pick up my card, it gets a little more wordy. On the back of the card is the set-aside prayer that I'm currently using. It changes over time as I change. And you're welcome to take the card for that very purpose. Of course, my contact information is on it, and you're also welcome to contact me if you have any questions about what I'm saying or what you're experiencing. And so the step 2 then takes us, if in fact there is if within inside of my skin there is no power, by my experience, not by my thinking. I have an allergy, that's my experience. I have an obsession, that's my experience. And I have unmanageability, that's my experience. 3 different experiences over a 10-year period because of 3 different trips through the steps. As you get more light, my favorite analogy is the dimmer switch. We have a light switch. If we turn the lights off, it would get dark, and if we turn the lights on, boom, it would get immediately light. Bill talks about that as a spiritual experience, an immediate, overwhelming sense of a sudden change. Not my experience. My experience is like a dimmer switch. Incremental changes, 1 click at a time, 1 day at a time, 1 week at a time, 1 month at a time, 1 year at a time. each time I went through the steps in the first 10 years, that was 4 times. Each time the dimmer switch went up sufficiently for me to have some more light so that I could see that I didn't see, and I could know and experience that I didn't know. And it was startling. And now I know that the dimmer switch is on an infinite swivel. All right? Because I'm in connection with an infinite mystery. This is my experience and my belief. And that dimmer switch goes up a notch at a time as I stay gently pressed up against it. That's my favorite analogy also. I stay gently pressed up against the dimmer switch because it's spring-loaded to go backwards. If I rest on my laurels, the big book says in step 10, all right? I'm going to be in trouble. And now I believe it's because that dimmer switch goes back a notch at a time, all right, unless I stay gently pressed up against it with the steps that Bill calls our way of life. Steps 10, 11, and 12. We'll get to those in just a minute. But step 3 is about making a decision to have a relationship with the mystery. I make a decision based on my decision in step 2. God is. Bill's very clear about it. It's laser focused, black and white. God is, or God isn't. What's your choice? What's your choice? A decision. Now, there's no certitude to that. It's an act of faith. It's an act of my will. I choose God is. I don't have any more knowledge, any more certitude, or any specific feeling that it is so, but then I act as if it is. And you've heard that in the 12-step programs. You've heard that probably in your own recovery communities. It doesn't matter what you know. It doesn't matter what you feel. It does matter what you do. Act as if. And later down the road, you'll get some information, and later down the road, you'll thaw out enough to have some feelings and be able to manage them. And so we make a decision to have a relationship with the mystery. But then we realize, oh my God, there is so much impediment in me to have a relationship with the light, to have a relationship with the mystery, to have a relationship with God or higher power or spirit of the universe, whatever it is. And you really feel like you're in the bondage, in jail. You're in the bondage of self, Bill calls it, but we don't feel about the self part at the step 3 stage. We're still, quite frankly, in the first blushes of our recovery and doing the steps, we're still pretty much clueless as to the source of our problems. We're in jail. We're in the prison that has been created for us, would be the shuddha that we would believe. And the obstacles of power are step 4. Bill Wilson talks about the nature of the spiritual malady. The reason underneath that bedevilment is selfishness and self-centeredness. That my will always choose me. My free will always choose me on my own power, and it'll be manifested in resentment, and it'll be manifested in fear, and it'll be manifested in inappropriate sex, and dishonesty, secrets, guilt, and shame. Guilt and shame are not in the big book. Those are my additions based on my experience from awareness of my own emotions and development and psychology. So I include those as part of my instructions in the step 4 preparation. But, I don't know whether Bill was as conscious of what he was doing as, quite frankly, I think we are today. But isn't it interesting, and he did talk about it in the 12 and 12 in step 4, and that is instincts gone awry. So we have anger, our primitive survival instinct for fight. We have fear, our primitive survival instinct for flight. We have sex and dishonesty, which I believe are correlated, which is our primitive instinct for survival of the race and to hide, freeze, and camouflage. All right, it comes right out of our biological instincts. But then we develop, as we evolve as human beings, a responsibility to have our limbic system managed by our cortex, to be able to see and manage our emotions rather than being led by our emotions. The action steps here are to confess everything that you wrote in the fourth step. I'm using the word confess, Bill doesn't, all right? But that's what it is. It's sitting down with somebody and revealing the entire thing. And normally it takes quite a long time, and normally it's quite embarrassing, and normally it's quite humbling, and that's the point. That is the point. People ask me all the time. Don't you have them, the people that go through the fourth step, not only write out all of their deficiencies, but balance it out with their virtues and their strengths and assets? And I said, no, I don't. No, not one bit. It's not in the big book, number one, and it's not my experience. How do you deconstruct the false self? How do you deconstruct the persona that has been created by years of habitual thinking that I'm the center of the universe and that you're my problem? It's like a Hollywood storefront. This persona, this mask that I wear, that I think is me. I could take a lie detector test before I did this work. And I would describe who I was, and I would pass the test. And it would have been a lie. Because it was a description of a Hollywood storefront. A mask that I was wearing, a persona that I had created from all of my effort at survival. And this process is the deconstruction of that Hollywood storefront, the deconstruction of that false self, so that in fact the true self can emerge. This is really a rite of passage into spiritual maturity. And the relationship with self is signaled coming to conclusion in step 7, where you've seen how it manifests in step 6 in terms of character defects, and then you pray a prayer because you also know intuitively and by experience that you have tried really hard to change yourself and to change your behavior and to change your character defects. Therapy, self-help, organized religion, years and years, decades and decades, lots of money, lots of time. No change. No change. I am powerless. Is it maybe no accident then that Bill has scripted a prayer at the 7-step prayer that begins my Creator? Because at this point I know that I need to be recreated. I have some thoughts about prayer. If you have any resistance to the thought about prayer, prayer is not to change God. Prayer is not to change higher power. Prayer is not to change anything outside of ourselves. Prayer is my acknowledgement and my aspiration to be changed. All right? Because if in fact there is a God, and I really mean that, if in fact there is a God, all right, it doesn't reward or punish. It doesn't come and go. Bill said it on page 53, that intuition, that mystical intuition. God is or God is not. God is everything or God is nothing. If God is everything, there is no place that there is not God. And one of the mystics said, God is closer to me than I am to myself. My own spiritual director looked me straight in the eyes after one session, because I'm a task-oriented person. I get my value from building stuff and making things happen and having you light up and get my appreciation. It's wonderful. I love it. I mean, don't stop. But he said, Herb, he says, you have to get this. God loves you unconditionally, no matter what you do or don't do. God can't love you any less nor any more, no matter what you do or don't do. God leans up against you at all times in unconditional love. That was fabulous. It's a very consoling thought. I have no idea whether it's true. Yeah, but I live my life as if it is. So I don't really care whether it's true or not, because my life flourishes as the result of doing this work and staying present to helping people understand how to awaken. All right? I'm currently reading, because I'm fascinated by psychology, I'm currently reading about positive psychology. Seligman, the father of positive psychology, and I got his book, his first book, and it's called Flourish. Well, I've been telling people that my life flourishes for 25 years. So I completely, obviously, resonate with this whole area of looking at mental wellness and well-being rather than looking at mental illness and addiction. We look at all of it. What brought me to, I believe, the foundation of my spiritual development was actually making the amends. Amends means two things in my interpretation of experience. Number one, amend the Constitution, change. It means I'm committed to changing the things that were hurting people. I'm committed to changing those things that create the damage around me. That's the first meaning of amend. The second meaning is to repair. Repair the damage, to go out into the world and say, I believe I've harmed you this way. This is what I'm going to do to kind of repair that. Is there anything else that you would recommend? Whoa, the hardest step in the whole process, and the one you need experience guidance for. All right? Experience guidance. The man who took me through the steps said to me, I don't have any experience with that damage to a woman. You need to go to a woman in the program who has experience and ask her, if this happened to you by me, how would you like me to approach you, or would you, and repair it? And I did that, and the woman gave me specific instructions, which I followed. And there was healing. The healing on her part, and she said that, and the healing on my part. All right? It's an amazing process of healing, and it's the last phase of the forgiveness process. I've become acquainted with forgiveness through this process just from the 12-step vocabulary and the learning about my role, my responsibility in my life, 100%, and the damage that I've done to other people in trying to not do more damage and trying to repair the damage that I've done. But I also had the opportunity to be on a panel with Fred Luskin in 1990. He had just published his book. If you haven't read it, please get it and read it. He's a clinical psychologist from Stanford. His book is Forgive for Good. And it lays out all of the psychological principles of forgiveness. So he was asked to be on the panel to review the psychological development and rhythm and methodology and principles of forgiveness. And I was asked to be on the panel to bring all of that from the 12-step spirituality viewpoint. And I looked up the word forgiveness in the dictionary. Please, don't overlook the dictionary. I looked up the word forgiveness in the dictionary. Look at my hand. Look at my hand. Forgiveness is a decision to release them. Could it be that simple? I make a decision to release them. I'm not condoning what they did. I'm not judging. I'm not retaliating. I'm not exacting revenge. No. I'm making a decision to release it from me and to release them from their behavior. They were doing it. Maybe they were doing it and I got in the way. All right? Maybe they were even doing it and it was personal. But whatever it was, just 3 weeks ago in meditation, I came with this phrase. A person, because I've done some more work in the forgiveness area, a person who has forgiven has no past. A person who has not forgiven has no future. A fellow author there. Yeah, I mean, it's just powerful. Because the lack of forgiveness is the cancer in the foundation, the worm in the wood, that will eventually metastasize and shrivel our soul. Please, yeah.
Does that forgiveness definition also apply to us forgiving ourselves?
Absolutely. And such a wonderful question because...
Original sentence
Yes, it came from me. It came from the Spirit.
Can you repeat that again?
Can you repeat it?
Oh, a person who has forgiven has no past. A person who doesn't forgive has no future. Yeah, I know, it's powerful. If you go to my website, there's a lot of material on there, one of which is called the Way of Life document. And in that document, right after the 9th step, is my meditation on forgiveness. It's a 3-page meditation, which now includes that new piece on it. And you might find it helpful. Lots of people have. And so, at the beginning of the Step 4 process, we saw a guy in jail. I got this from the New Yorker about 30 years ago, all right? And it was, in the New Yorker, it was, a guy was holding, on the first frame, he was holding bars that he was looking through like this. And then the second cartoon frame had this panorama. The guy's not in jail. There's no sides to it. There's nothing holding it except the bars that he has put up in front of his face. And we discover that when we do steps 4 through 9. That we're in the bondage of self. A self-created prison. We thought we were protecting ourselves by creating these barriers, and all we did was build the prison that we live in. And we don't know that we don't know, and we can't see that we don't see. And we find freedom on the other side of this. We enter the world of the Spirit, Bill says in step 10. Really? Step 10. We enter the world of the Spirit. Well, where the hell have we been?
In hell.
We've been in the world of self. Einstein, one of my favorite guys. He's had I usually in my workshops I have a whiteboard and a blackboard and all that. So here's a fictitious cartoon about Einstein. And he's at a chalkboard or a whiteboard. And he's looking at the class. And he says, the average alcoholic is very much capable of such feelings as love, affection, intimacy, and caring. These feelings just do not involve anyone else. Isn't that just, oh my God. So we enter the world of the Spirit because we've been given a spiritual awakening through the process of the steps. We've been brought out. Hear my vocabulary. We didn't climb out of the pit. We have been brought out of the pit. If we're powerless, we're powerless. And yet, as humans with a free will, we're responsible. And I reconcile that. I don't understand it, but I reconcile it. Grace and willingness. Grace is my term for that positive energy that is a mystery, that we cannot earn. That's the definition of grace. Freely given, unconditionally given. And I don't need to give it a God orientation. I am trying to universalize, all right, to a positive energy or whatever it is, but I don't understand it. Which comes first, the chicken or the egg? Well, he was willing, therefore he got the grace. Oh, he got the grace, therefore he was willing. Really? I took it into meditation again. I was given a poem. It didn't answer the riddle, but it satisfied me because it was a poem. And the Spirit said to me, I was taken to a place of willingness. Ah, hear the grace. I was taken to a place of willingness, but I was willing to be taken. My role, my responsibility, my effort. Did it explain anything? No. Did it satisfy me? Yes. There's a touch point. I can't explain it. I can observe it. I have experienced it. My experience is that my evolution, my development, is much grander and more impactful than my contribution to it. It's disproportionate. All right? That's my definition of a spiritual awakening. A change in the way we think and feel and behave, and it's done to us, not by us. But Bill says we commence this way of living as we cleaned up the past, all right? We have a daily reprieve contingent on the maintenance of a spiritual condition. Every day is a day that we must envision our vision of God's will And every day we must align our will with that vision. I'll unpack that in just a minute, a little bit more. But we're entering into the 10th step, being guaranteed, hello, read the big book. We've been placed in a position of neutrality. Not before the 10th step. Assuming that it is the completion of the 9th step. A lot of work. Perhaps some relapses in steps 1 through 9. Not my experience, but lots of other people's experience. Do people start over again? Not in my world. All right? They continue on the step process until they can get to step 10, because that's where you're promised neutrality. It's very clear there. And it's a gift that's given to us. All right? We're not cured, he says, but we have recovered, and that's our physical sobriety by the time we get to 10th step. But he says, watch. All right? Watch for, not yet. Our way of life are 3 pieces. Steps 10, inventory. Step 11, meditation. And step 12, service. We clear the channel. We fill the channel. We distribute from the channel. That's my mental image of our way of life, Bill calls it. Our way of life. Spirituality, our way of life. Maintaining inventory on a daily basis. I'll get to step 10 in a little bit more detail in a minute. And step 11. Oh, here's step 10. There's a lot of confusion around step 10. I hear it all the time in the rooms of 12-step. Oh, I'm going to do a written 10-step. Oh, I'm going to do my 10-step at night. You know, I don't really care what you do and when you do it, but if you're following the spirit and instructions of the big book, as annotated in the 12 and 12 in step 10, Bill wrote the 12 and 12 with 15 years of sobriety, 15 years of living our way of life, 15 years of hearing other people's experience with the steps. So it's a wonderful commentary on the steps, the 12 and 12. And the 12 and 12 says the 2 things. It's a spiritual axiom that when we're disturbed, there's something wrong with us. Damn. It was always easier when I was disturbed and it was you that was disturbing me. Or it was you that was disturbing me. Or it was them that were disturbing me. But after I do step 4, I realize I don't have a part in my disturbance. Another thing that gives me a chuckle. Well, what's your part? Really, huh? What I've discovered is I don't have a part in my being disturbed. I have the whole enchilada. 100%. If I'm disturbed, it's because I have a problem. I have lenses that have been delusional again. I have a belief system, a script, a story that I put out to myself that you didn't get the memo. And you're not cooperating with my story, with my rules. Fred Luskin calls them unenforceable rules. It's a huge breakthrough. Byron Katie calls it dealing with reality. If you haven't read her book, Loving What Is, Byron Katie. Is her first name is her last name, whatever. And she doesn't come from organized religion. She doesn't come from the world of psychology. She doesn't come from the world of recovery. And yet, she's seen the truth. She's seen the false self. She talks about how to penetrate the false self, or the artificial self, that mask, and have what she calls the turnaround, where I stop blaming you and I start taking responsibility. It's a spiritual axiom. Whenever I am disturbed, there is something wrong with me. And Bill calls it a spot check inventory. That tells us how to use the 10th step. It's a tool that we have in our spiritual kit that allows us on the spot to see where we're resentful and fearful and dishonest and selfish. The 4 horsemen of step 4. And Bill very glibly says, when they crop up. Never if, when. We're human beings. We never transcend our humanity. All right? Now, that manifestation, gross in the beginning, becomes much more subtle over time. All right? Rather than dealing with 500-pound tuna, we're dealing with mosquitoes. But nevertheless, mosquitoes are disturbing. They're annoying. They're irritating. And so what do? He says. Number one, we pray. It's a recap of all the steps up till now. We pray because we're powerless. We discuss it with somebody because we're human. Prayer because I'm powerless. Accountability because I'm human. And we make amends if we've created harm. And we turn our thoughts to helping somebody else. We turn our thoughts to helping somebody else. Another image. I love images and mental images and symbols and poetry because it helps me get grounded in what is the reality, because I can't see it because it's so not concrete. The whole program of spirituality, I don't mean AA. I don't even mean the 12 steps. The whole program of spirituality, whether it was Buddhism or Hinduism or Judaism or Christianity or Islam, 80% of the world belong to one of those 5 traditions, and each one of them can be boiled down into 2 major principles, which I'll talk about in just a minute. But the problem is the spiritual malady is that my will always choose me. Look up at me. You on the phone, look up at me. All right? The problem is self-centeredness. And the solution is the turning. Step 3. Made a decision to turn. From what to what? From my self-centeredness to other-centeredness. Made a decision to turn and realized that we were turned. That combination of willingness and grace. I made the decision in step 3, and I took the actions of step 4 through 9, and I realized that I was turned from my selfishness to a desire to be other-centered. And so the final action in this 10-step process is to think about, he says. It doesn't even actually say take any action. He says think about helping somebody else. And what happens? We get results. Instead of resentment, we're in a position of an attitude of forgiveness. Instead of fear, we have trust. Instead of dishonesty, we have honesty. And instead of selfishness, we are pretty much modeling ourselves with the vision of love, and perhaps even aspiring to unconditional love, which is not possible in the human state. Because as material beings, we will always be conditional. There is only one reality, if there is that reality, with a capital R, that can be unconditional, because it is everything. It doesn't need anything. It has no aspirations. And this is emotional sobriety. That is, I begin to be conscious of the mosquitoes or the 500-pound tuna, and I begin managing them in my life. Not doing it in writing, and not doing it at night. Do it at night, do it in writing if that's what you like, if that works for you. I'm very practical, I have no rules. But the 10th step is a tool for spot check inventory, on the spot. If I was working with my administrative person and I was impatient, and I walk into my office in a huff, I go, oh God. I'll come out and I'll apologize for it, I'll take whatever action I had, and she said, Herb, eat a little lunch because you get to be an asshole when you don't. Yeah, and so she knows after 10 years of working, all right? And so then we get into the next 2 steps, what I see as the spiritual coin, having 2 sides. This is the other-centeredness of step 11, a relationship with consciousness. Consciousness with a capital C. And other-centeredness with a capital O. And the 12th step, which is to enlarge our spiritual life, our relationship to the community about us, especially the 12-step community that we're in. See, the spirit of the big book is discerned when you read the pre-publication transcript that they had. And the 12th step read, before the big book was published, the 12th step read, having had a spiritual experience as the result of these steps, we tried to carry the message to others, especially alcoholics. Well, that reveals a spirit that was revealed in the first paragraph of the first printing of the big book, where he said, our way of living may have its advantages for all. Not just alcoholics, not just the Al-Anon, not just people in 12-step recovery. Our way of living, this methodology of 12 steps and the transformation that comes from it, and the practice of spiritual principles that we're organically brought into, is a way of living potentially for everybody. That's the basis of my workshops. And that's spiritual sobriety. Physical sobriety by the time we get to the 10th step. Emotional sobriety by practicing the 10th step on a daily basis. He says we have a daily reprieve. I don't think I mentioned this. Look up in the dictionary, reprieve. Stay of execution. A daily reprieve, contingent on the maintenance of our spiritual condition. He says every day we need to get a vision of God's will for us. Translate, meditation. In the morning, we begin it. In the evening, actually, he asks us to do inventory. He asks us to do meditation twice a day. In the evening, an inventory, and in the morning, he says, ask God to direct your thinking, and then think. Think about the 24 hours ahead. Consider your plans for the day. So much confusion around meditation because of the garble of the vocabulary that came over from the East in the 50s and the 60s. And they talked about no mind and detachment from mind and inner silence and quiet and etc. And people go, yeah, that's meditation. No, that's not meditation. Look it up in the dictionary. Webster's Dictionary. Meditation is directed thinking, is reflective thinking, is an action of the mind about an issue to resolve an issue. Now, what the Yoganandis and the Maharishis were talking about when they came over in the 50s and the 60s, some of you don't remember that. But anyway, I remember most of it in between the LSD trips, right? They said, what they were talking about with no mind, detached from mind, inner silence, all right, is contemplation. So we have three methods of consciousness, which are part of my practice: prayer, and meditation, and contemplation. Contemplation isn't referred to in the big book. Prayer and meditation are. And you've heard it glibly in the 12-step meetings. Glibly, but wisely. Prayer is when we're talking to God. Meditation is when I'm listening to God. And this man who took me through the steps broke the code for me. I mean, 7 years in the monastery and I didn't know how to meditate. He broke the code. He had me read the 2.5 pages in the big book, 85 to 88. And he said, it starts out in the morning. Ask God to direct your thinking. Then begin thinking, listening to your thoughts as transmission, as guidance. Going back to what the Oxford group, the original predecessor of AA, had done. Meditation as a method of receiving guidance. Anyway, so it all leads us to this spiritual awakening that I've talked about before, a change in the way we think and feel and behave, and it's done to us, not by us. And so we then try to carry this message. That was the key for Bill. Abby Thatcher carried the message to Bill. And Bill codifies that in chapter 7, page 89, in which he says, nothing will so much ensure immunity as constant work with others. If the problem is self-centeredness, the solution is other-centeredness. Now we have to be careful here because of our sophistication and knowledge and experience of codependency. especially where, the people are overly committed to exhausting themselves for other people, for all the reasons that you probably know from the literature. And then practicing spiritual principles. One of the reasons I passed out that one thing was that on the back of it are the spiritual principles as I've intuited them from a review of other people's lists, and I keep wordsmithing it, listing the spiritual principles connected to each of the steps, giving the action that might be connected to it. But it's about practicing principles. See, over 40% of the big book is about step 12. Chapter 7, of course, is about carrying the message. It's a template for sponsorship. But you probably know that the word sponsorship's not in the big book. Yeah, it's not in. I got a publisher who does word search. And I asked him, is the word sponsor in the big book? It's not. In the Roman numerals in the first 164 pages. I have a theory on that. Sometime later. But step 12 is codified in chapter 7. It's a template for sponsorship. Chapter 8 is about principles in your relationships to the wives. 9 is about principles in our family afterward. Chapter 10, to the employer, principles in our workforce. And chapter 11 is entitled A Vision for You. But when you read it, it's clearly about principles in your community, spiritual principles in your fellowship, our way of life. And there's a lot of moving parts. That's the other flip side of this handout. There's a lot of moving parts, and we could talk more about that, but not right now. The most important part is sponsorship. Because if you have a sponsor, an experienced person who has time, big qualifiers, an experienced person who has time and will take that time to tell you the truth and risk hurting your feelings, that's a sponsor, all right? You'll do all the rest of it. So I've come full circle. I used to think meetings were the key. Then I had the step experience of spiritual awakening. The steps. And now, with a lot more experience, I know sponsor. Sponsor's the key. Because if you have a sponsor, you'll go to meetings. If you have a sponsor, you'll work the steps. And what happens? We have a process, not an event, of awakening and the integration that we talk about in emotional and spiritual maturity. But as I said, that dimmer switch goes back a notch at a time. If in fact you violate spiritual principles, they're every bit as intangible, intractable as physical principles. If you wanted to fly and you studied flying and you buffed up and you made some wings and you went up to the top of a 30-story building and you jumped off flapping your wings, really wanting to fly, knowing how to fly, feeling strongly that you can fly, what's going to happen to you? You're going to die. Because gravity, a physical principle, doesn't have any relationship or care about what happens to you. It's a completely independent, neutral, physical principle. Universal or spiritual or human principles, call it what you want, are absolutely as intractable. We can, with our free will, go along with spiritual principles or can go against spiritual principles. To the extent that we go along with spiritual principles, our lives flourish. To the extent that we go across the stream flow or up the stream flow against spiritual principles, our lives will have speed bumps and some major obstacles. And if we have that, of course, the obsession returns and then the allergy returns and we're back in the darkness again. So awakening is that transformation, that change from the self-centeredness to the other-centeredness. A relationship with the mystery and a relationship with others and ourselves. If you want to know about what is God's will and what is my will, I hear it all the time in my workshops. If in fact you're experiencing any of this, you're in self-will. You're going against spiritual principles. if you're experiencing this, you're more or less aligned with spiritual principles. I don't care whether you call it God's will or the human condition. It doesn't make any difference. These are the spiritual principles that will provide a positive experience with life and meaning. These are the violation of spiritual or human or universal principles that in fact will ensure trouble in your life. And so, the code in the big book, the way it actually ends, is to trust God. First 3 steps. To clean house, steps 4 through 9. And to serve others. Steps 10, 11, and 12 are way of life. And of course, a little commercial. All right? So, my guidebook is a guide to the instructions as to how to work the steps out of the big book. And my second book is my experience and broader than just the 12-step process, but my experience from my broader exposure to both psychology and spirituality. Thank you. You've been wonderful.